Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be demonstrating today how to make gluten-free cookies. These are almond flour chocolate chip cookies. The recipe was created by King Arthur Flour. I think most of the recipes I've posted so far have been at least in some way based on a King Arthur Flour recipe. Um, these are really nice cookies. They have a little bit of a different texture than sort of a wheat flour based cookie, but still very nice. I don't think anybody would notice that they are a little bit different unless you told them. Um, and I'm using, instead of chocolate chips, I'm using chopped chocolate. I know some people have mentioned that it's a little bit hard to get chocolate chips right now. And so that's another option if you have trouble with that, is to get like a chocolate bar. And they actually make baking bars. Trader Joe's has really great, like huge baking bars. And you can just cut those up with a big knife to use for stuff like this. I actually use that type of chocolate all the time. Chocolate chips, they're good because they have stabilizers in them that keeps them whole, keeps them kind of the same shape. So you'll notice most chocolate, if you put it in a 350-degree oven, would just like turn into liquid and go flat, and a chocolate chip will actually hold its shape. And that's one of the reasons they're good for cookies. But I find that they often have a lot more sugar in them, and that I'm able to get kind of a deeper chocolate flavor by using a chocolate bar that has like 75% cocoa or 85% cocoa. So that's what I've started doing. Um, yeah. So funny story. While I'm okay, Sangeeta, my friend, is saying she got butterscotch chips as her husband can't eat chocolate. Yes, also a good solution. If you didn't like chocolate chips or couldn't find them, you could also use raisins, or you could like chop up some walnuts and add them. It doesn't have to be a chocolate chip cookie, although of course that's a very classic American cookie, is a chocolate chip cookie. But you can use whatever you like as a mix-in. So if you need the recipe, we're using King Arthur Flour's gluten-free almond chocolate chip cookies recipe. So you can Google that. I think I've posted the link in the event. So if you need the recipe, that is where you will find it. Okay, so we're starting off with a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Um, that is equal to about 53 grams of brown sugar. So I think I have just enough brown sugar. Um, if I didn't have enough brown sugar, I do have molasses on hand, and so I could add just a tiny bit, maybe like a teaspoon of molasses to my white sugar to kind of make it into a brown sugar flavor. Okay, so there's my brown sugar, and then 1/2 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Wait, really? Just, okay, yeah, 1/2 teaspoon is really not very much. Okay, so there we go. 1/4 teaspoon salt. So I'm just going to use my 1/2 teaspoon measure and just kind of fill it half full because I'm not sure where my 1/4 teaspoon measure ended up. Oh, Juliana's saying that the brown sugar hack is really helpful. You should look up online what the proportions are of molasses to brown sugar, but I do know that it works. I just don't remember exactly how much one would add. And I think if you're just looking for, like, so the thing with brown sugar is that it will absorb more water, like kind of has more water in it than white sugar. And so that would be one of the reasons that it would actually matter whether you use white sugar or brown sugar in a recipe. And so if you don't have molasses, you do have white sugar, you might be able to add a little bit of honey also to kind of get some of that syrupy property. Okay. How did I not know I could make my own? We don't know a lot of things that we can make on our own. The companies really have convinced us that we have to buy stuff like salad dressing or brown sugar, but there's a way to adjust a lot of things. So I'm going to turn my mixer on low, and I'm just kind of waiting. Turn that up a little higher. That's not doing anything. And I want like everything to kind of be together and smooth. My butter might be a little too warm for this. I guess if I didn't say this already or you didn't look at the recipe, you want to be using room temperature butter, and that's because room temperature butter is soft and will mix with other things. If it is straight from the fridge, it's going to be too firm and it's not going to break down with the brown sugar. So if you didn't get your butter out earlier, which I think I didn't get mine out early enough, but it's too late now, you can actually put your butter in the microwave for like 10 seconds at a time and then lower the power level. So instead of having it at like 100% power, you can put it like 50% power, and then just kind of like go really slowly. You don't want to melt the butter. It is important for it to still kind of have some firmness, like not to be liquid, I guess, but just kind of gently, like a few seconds at a time on a low power, just sort of pulse it until your butter is more like, pliable, spreadable. Okay, this will work. This will be okay. Got a little bit of brown sugar sort of sticking to the bottom of the bowl, so I'm just going to kind of move that around and make sure that it's all going to get mixed. Okay, I think that's good. So I don't know if you can see, it's kind of like it's like a paste texture now. The butter and the sugar are all, I think it's called creaming. They're all like mixed together, creamed together. All right, so next thing, I'm gonna add the vanilla. So 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Just kind of a lot of vanilla. And if you don't have vanilla, I think it's fine. I think you'll still have a good result. This is kind of, I feel like vanilla is kind of like salt, like it makes things taste, well, okay, salt is necessary. Salt makes things taste like themselves. But in a sense that you're not going to really notice if you don't put it in. And then this recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon almond extract. Almond extract is a very strong flavor. Just checking to see if there's any. Yeah, almond extract's a very strong flavor, so you don't want to free pour it. You want to really make sure you're measuring it. If you like have to err on the side of not putting in enough, because it just is going to have like a lot of flavor. It's very, very easy to use too much. That said, it has kind of a nice cherry aroma, and I think it's going to work really well with the almond flour. And then an egg. Right. Yeah, so I'm going to mix that again at medium speed until it all kind of comes together. And the recipe points out that you need to kind of scrape the bottom because the brown sugar tends to kind of fall to the bottom. So I'm going to mix that a little bit and then turn it back on medium speed and let it mix until it's nice and smooth. Brown sugar is still kind of sticking, so I'm going to just loosen it up again. Okay, so if you were following along with the recipe, which I wasn't doing carefully enough, you would have seen that this is the time where we add our almond flour also. So that's probably why this isn't coming together the way that I expected. So I'm going to do that following instructions. Um, so you're going to do 2 cups of almond flour, or if you're doing it in weight, that's 192 grams of almond flour. And it says you can use blanched or raw. Mine is blanched almond flour, which is very nice. It's very pretty. Blanched means that they very quickly um, like boiled something. So you can actually do this with green beans. You can do it with tomatoes or like a number of things you might want to blanch. So in the case of almonds, it means that you very quickly boil them, and that means that their skins, that dark part of the almond, will come off. And I think that part is like has a slightly more bitter flavor, like it actually tastes different than the rest of the nut, and obviously it's going to give it like a darker color. So this is blanched almond flour, which has that nice white color, but you can also use almond, at least in the stores I shop at, it's called almond meal, and I think it's the whole almond all ground up. Um, and so it's going to have a slightly different taste, but the texture should be still fine. It should still make a good cookie. Right, I'm almost there. Great. Okay. Oh, question about the almond flour. Is it fluffy in the cup or more packed in? I would go with more packed in. This is one of the nice things about doing it by weight is I don't really have to worry about that. So if you do have a kitchen scale, this would be a good use for it. But I would say more packed in. And then just kind of monitor your dough if it seems too crumbly. You could add like a teaspoon of water or so, something like that. But yeah, I would say like a little bit more full. That's pretty close. I'm just going to scrape it and then let it run for a few more seconds. Okay, so now my texture is kind of back to a paste. So mine looks like this. You can still kind of see the sugar a little bit if you look closely, but it's bound together nicely with the egg. And so this is the point where, oh shoot, thing I forgot to do, friends. I didn't preheat my oven. If you also have not preheated your oven, do that now. We're baking at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that is about 200 degrees Celsius, but do go check that in the very useful Google. Yeah, so we're gonna do that. My oven preheats pretty quickly, so I'm probably still fine. It'll probably be ready by the time we are done mixing. Okay, so here's the step where we put in our chocolate, which is very fun. The recipe says to use a half cup of chocolate chips. That didn't seem like really enough for a chocolate chip cookie recipe to me, so I did like maybe 3/4 of a cup worth of chocolate. And you can see I just kind of chopped that up into, it doesn't have to be even pieces. I actually kind of like how it looks when it's all like shattered into different size pieces, and that's going to really get it kind of all throughout the cookie. There'll be tiny, tiny little crumbles of chocolate everywhere, which is, kind of the point of a chocolate chip cookie or a butterscotch chip cookie, it's also good to have lots of butterscotch flavor. Okay, I'm gonna go rinse my fingers because the chocolate like melted a little bit as I was handling it. So fun thing I learned about chocolate is that it melts at about the temperature of our bodies, so like right around 98 degrees. which is why, like, if you put chocolate on your fingers, like, it will melt pretty much immediately. Okay. Okay, just make sure that that's all mixed through. I don't know why I didn't double this. I really should have done that. This is not going to make enough cookies. I might have to like do this again tomorrow or something. Not tomorrow, Monday. We'll probably be okay through tomorrow. Okay, that's good. One nice thing about working with almond flour is that because it doesn't have gluten, you can kind of work it as much as you want or as much as you feel like you need to. When you're working with wheat flour, the gluten is a protein. I think we've talked about this. I'm not an expert, but from my understanding, the gluten is a protein, and when you kind of work it with liquid and you sort of rub it against each other, the gluten forms chains. And the more you do that, the more chains you get. And when we're making bread, that's great because those chains sort of form little balloons, little pockets inside the bread. And as the yeast sort of blows its gas or whatever, I mean, it's definitely a gas. I don't know what kind of gas. But as the yeast sort of blows into those pockets, they blow up like little balloons, and that's how we get air in our bread. And we're doing like just like a wheat-based bread. But if you're making a cookie, you don't really want it to be tough. So if you're using a wheat flour, you have to be careful how much you mix it because you don't want that gluten to sort of be bumping up against itself and making those chains. But when you're doing this with almond flour, it's not going to do that. So we don't have to worry about that. There are other reasons to worry about overmixing in the peanut butter cookie that we did last week. If you were to mix the what's it called, the brown sugar and the peanut butter too much, you could end up with a situation where it gets kind of greasy. So it's not just about the gluten, why we would like only mix for a certain amount of time. There can be other reasons, but that is one thing to be aware of when working with gluten-based flours, or not based flours. I mean, they're not like mostly made of gluten, but when working with flours that have gluten in them, which is there are only 3 grains that have gluten in them. That's wheat, barley, and rye. And you'll hear about like spelt flour or other things. That's a variety of one of those 3 plants. I think spelt is like an ancient variety of wheat, maybe, something like that. All right, cool. So you can see, I think it just looks like cookie dough. You can see that. And I'm going to use a baking mat. If you don't have baking mats, you can use baking spray or you can use butter, whatever you need to do. Okay, so now we are going to, this part we just have to be a little bit careful. It's not tricky. I wouldn't say it's tricky, but we're going to put the dough on here 1 tablespoon at a time. I have this scoop. This is a little bit more than a tablespoon, so I'm going to try not to fill it completely full. If you don't have a scoop, you can just use 2 spoons. So I'll show that method first. I don't know, I'm just kind of guessing what a tablespoon might be. So I'm going to do that and then kind of push it off here onto the baking sheet. And this is what I grew up doing, is using 2 spoons. And it works pretty well. But it is faster, like with the cookie scoop. I don't know, it's like kind of amazing how quickly you can get the cookies onto the sheet. Let's see. So it says that I need to put these at least 1.5 inches apart. So I'm gonna spread these out a little bit more. Let's see, and I'm gonna try to make a grid of like 3 cookies this way and then 5 cookies this way. Yeah, that'll fit. Okay. So doing our times tables, 3 times 5 is 15. You know, I feel like people would remember the times tables better if their manipulables that they used to practice were cookies. Does anybody else feel that way? I think that would work. I think a lot of kids would just enjoy math a lot more if it were all about cookies. So trying to kind of make these the same size. It's going to be okay if they're not entirely the same size. And I don't have to get them in like exactly the right spot right now because I have to like mess with them again. We are going to flatten these out a little bit. Ooh, I can smell the almond extract. It smells really nice. Okay, so I've still got some dough in here, so I must not have portioned this out quite right. I'm going to try to add a little bit more to some of my cookies that look smaller. I didn't commit there. I thought that that was a small cookie, but then I decided it wasn't, and then my dough ended up like not really in a place that made sense. Okay. And cookies on the corners are going to get like a little bit more heat because they get heat from the side. I want to make sure that those are at least as big as the other cookies, and sometimes I even make them a little bit bigger because that gives them a better chance of still being soft in the middle. Okay. Last little bit of dough. Where do I want to put this? Right here. Right here. Okay, so next thing. Now we're gonna flatten the cookies to like just under a 1/2 inch thick. And as I'm doing this, I'm gonna kind of like eyeball it to see if any of the cookies look bigger than others. It looks pretty good, right? That's, I don't know if you can see that. I just flattened that out sort of to like about a 1/2 inch thick, and they're not gonna spread too much. They'll spread a little bit, so don't put them like right next to each other. But they're gonna be okay. Okay, just flattening some cookies right now. Oh my gosh, they smell good. Almond flour is a very interesting flour to work with. It seems to work in a lot of things that I wouldn't expect in ways that like other non-gluten based flours don't work. Don't know why that is. So since I'm using chocolate that will melt, I had a chocolate chunk that was like on the outside of my cookie, which would have meant it would spread out onto the edge of my, like out from the edge of the cookie onto the baking sheet. I didn't want that. So I'm just kind of, any little bits that end up on the outside, I'm kind of just trying to push them back in a little bit so they'll be held in place by the dough. I may not succeed entirely, but that's okay. Some of them are kind of close together. I'm trying to decide how much I want to worry about that. Okay, just kind of tucking in the edges so that they're sort of rounded, trying to make sure they're all roughly the same thickness. Okay. So bad thing is I didn't like really carefully position these, and so now I'm having to like scoot them over so that the ones on the edge don't run into everything else. I definitely made some cookie batches that spread out and ran into each other, and it's very disappointing. All right, some of these are smaller than others, but generally the small ones are kind of in the middle, so I'm gonna say that that's all right. And some people like small cookies, so that's fine. So I'm just gonna put these in the oven. These are not like the peanut butter cookies. You don't have to let them chill in the fridge at all before you bake them. So I just put mine in the oven. I set a timer for 8 minutes, and that'll just remind me to check them a little bit before they're probably done so that I can see in case my oven is somehow running hotter than it should be, or just, I don't know, sometimes I'm not at altitude, but if you're at a different altitude higher up, your stuff will bake faster. So it can be helpful just to set your timer a little bit sooner than you think you need to so that you can check on your stuff hopefully before it gets too dark, because before it gets too dark, you have choices. You can always just set the timer for a couple more minutes. Once it gets too dark, then it's too late. I made granola this week and I left it in the oven too long, and now we're just eating very toasty granola, and it's not as good as my normal granola. So I'm trying to remember to set timers and be better about checking stuff. Um, Great. So I will post some photos of these when they're done. I'd love it if you guys post some photos. Oh, my friend Molly is on. Hi, Molly. Good to see you. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna sign off for now. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope the cookies turn out well. And I will see you next week. Let me know what else you want to learn to bake, and I will figure it out. I think we might do some no bakes, some cookies that you can make like on the stove top. And that's nice for in the summer when you don't want to turn on the oven and like heat up, you know, basically you're heating up an entire cube of your kitchen anytime you bake. So the stovetop can be nice because it's just like a smaller amount of heat, um, and the cookies are still very nice. So yeah, have a great week. Enjoy your cookies, and I will see you soon. Okay, I'm here with my friend Allison. We're gonna try some of the cookies.
Yes.
Yep, go ahead.
I am looking forward to this. Ooh, it's soft.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. It is really dark chocolate, so it's kind of bitter, but I like that.
Well, it blends together well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ah. Mm. It melds and it's really soft and moist in the inside.
Mm-hmm. And it'll firm up a little bit as the chocolate hardens, but I kind of like them this way.
I like it soft too.
Yeah. Okay, great.